My name is Hannah Collins, and on the very day we laid to rest the only person who had ever loved me unconditionally, my grandmother, my mother stood in front of the casket, leaned in close and whispered in my ear, "You don't deserve to be here," then slapped me hard across the face in full view of our stunned relatives. That slap didn't just split my lip, it shattered the last illusion I'd ever had that she might one day see me as her daughter. Have you ever been hurt most deeply by the very person who was supposed to protect you? If you have, you'll understand the burn, not just on the cheek but deep in the heart. I want to invite you to walk this entire road with me. Hit like, share and subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss a single part, because this story may make you rethink what family really means. That slap was only the spark that would ignite a much bigger fire, one that would burn away everything she had tried to keep hidden. I walked out of the funeral home into the icy ocean wind whipping at my collar, still clutching my grandmother's envelope, the paper inside as thin as if it were trembling with me. The sting of that slap still burned across my cheek, but what hurt more was the look of satisfaction on my mother's face. In her expensive black dress, she was still the picture of Charleston high society, but to me, she was the embodiment of coldness and cruelty. My father's old friends, the neighborhood women, everyone looked at our family with admiration. From the outside, we were a living postcard, a 3-story white-painted historic home on Broad Street, bright red bougainvillea spilling down from the balcony, my mother running a prestigious event planning company, my younger brother Luke in one of the top private schools, and me, the daughter who rarely appeared, always wearing just enough of a smile at parties. I learned to be silent very early. When my father was alive, he used to take me to the library every Saturday afternoon, letting me choose whatever books I wanted. He would say, "Hannah, knowledge is the one thing no one can ever take from you." But when I was 12, he died suddenly. An accident from falling off the second-floor balcony, they said. I remember that day. My mother cried for only a few seconds before slipping back into her composed face and immediately rearranging the house as if preparing for an event. From then on, the space between my mother and me only grew wider. Luke became the center of all her attention, while I was pushed to the margins. I still did well in school, still helped her when she needed to add a little decoration to the perfect family portrait, but I was never the priority. I'll never forget when I was 15, after winning a full scholarship to a prestigious music school in New York. I thought it was the one achievement my mother would actually be proud of. Instead, she stared at me and said, "Music is a hobby, not a career. You'll study law here in Charleston, so our family won't be shamed." A week later, I received a notice that my scholarship had been cancelled. Reason: I had declined enrollment. I knew whose signature was on that form, and it wasn't mine. That was when I realized my place in this house. A pawn for my mother to move as she pleased. She knew exactly how to say sweet words in front of others, and exactly when to strike me down when no one was watching. Phrases like, "You're such a failure," or "No one needs you," became part of our family dinners, tossed out as casually as small talk. Luke was different. He got a sports car the moment he was old enough to drive, summer trips to Europe, glowing recommendation letters to top universities, written by my mother herself. And me. Every time I mentioned applying to schools out of state, she'd frown and say, "So you're going to abandon this family to chase some silly dream?" After that slap at the funeral, all those memories came flooding back, sharper than ever. I walked along Broad Street, the red brick under my shoes still damp from the morning rain. The scent from the nearby bakery drifted over, but couldn't pull me into the present. I opened the envelope. Inside was a neatly folded letter and a cold metal key. My grandmother's handwriting was so familiar that one glance blurred my vision. "My dear Hannah, if you are reading this, it means I'm gone. I know life with your mother has never been easy. The beach house on Sullivan's Island and the savings with it are for you, to start a new life, away from the things that have held you back for too long. Don't let anyone take this chance from you." I clutched the letter, feeling both warmth and unease. My grandmother had always been my only ally, and now she was giving me a way out. But I also knew, if this was valuable, my mother wouldn't leave it alone. I tucked the letter into my coat pocket and took a taxi to the bank listed on the key. The building was grand, with white columns out front, staff in sharp suits. When I handed over the key and my ID, the manager glanced at them and shook his head. "I'm sorry, Miss Collins, but the ownership of this safe deposit box was transferred to Mr. Luke Collins 3 weeks ago." Froze. "That's impossible. This was my grandmother's gift to me. I've never signed any documents." He showed me a copy of the authorization form, bearing my signature, except the writing was stiff and missing the loops I always made. Leaving the bank, I sat silent in the cab, gripping the photocopy. My stomach twisted. Signature forgery, transfer of ownership. My mother had acted before my grandmother even passed away. Not only had she taken the house, she had stolen the one chance at freedom my grandmother had given me. If you've ever been betrayed by the person you trusted most, share this story and stay tuned, because what's coming will leave you even more speechless. I don't know how long I sat there before my phone rang. It was Rachel Turner, my only close friend from high school. Hearing my hoarse voice, she asked, "Hannah, are you okay?" I said simply, "I think my mother took the last thing my grandmother left me." Rachel was quiet for a moment, then said, "You need proof. And you know who can help." I knew she meant Evelyn Price, my senior year English teacher. Back when my mother humiliated me at a parent-teacher conference, Mrs. Evelyn had stood up for me, telling her plainly I was one of the best students she'd ever taught. After graduation, we'd lost touch, but I knew she was fair and had trustworthy connections. That night, I went to her small house in the suburbs. She opened the door, silver hair tied back, eyes both surprised and concerned. "Oh my goodness, Hannah, what happened?" I told her everything, from the slap at the funeral to the bank and the forged authorization. She didn't interrupt, just nodded occasionally. When I finished, she poured me tea and said, "This needs a lawyer. I'll introduce you to Mark Davis. He's good, and he's helped people in similar situations." The next day, Mrs. Evelyn and I met Mark at his downtown Charleston office. He was in his early 40s, tall, with a calm voice. He studied the authorization form and frowned. "The handwriting is close, but not exact. This is a textbook signature forgery. But we'll need more than this to take it to court, especially since your mother is well connected." I asked, "What else do we need?" He replied, "Proof of motive and related transactions. If she did this, there's a good chance she's also interfering with other assets." He had me sign authorization for him to investigate the family's property and trust accounts. 3 days later, Mark called, voice tense. "Hannah, you need to know. Your mother is draining the entire trust fund your father left for both you and Luke. It was supposed to be preserved until you were both 25. I felt heat rush to my temples. My father had left me something, and she was taking that too. I'd spent my life enduring to keep the peace, to avoid more family strain. But this time I knew I couldn't stay silent. Mark looked me straight in the eye. "If you want what's yours, we need to act now. But that means going head-to-head with your mother." I took a deep breath, a cold shiver running down my spine. I knew that once I stepped into this fight, there'd be no turning back. But for the first time in years, I felt a flicker inside me. Maybe hope, or maybe the resolve I'd been suppressing for too long. I left Mark's office in the late afternoon, golden lights stretching tired across the streets. One thought echoed in my head. My grandmother didn't entrust me with everything just to have it erased by a few forged papers. Her words, "Don't let anyone take this chance," rang like an alarm bell. That night I took the envelope out again. The letter was still there, along with the bank key that now meant nothing. But then my fingers felt something tucked in the lining, a small slip of paper sealed in. Pulled it out. It was a shaky handwritten note. If you have trouble, find Sarah McConnell at Atlantic Bank. She's an old friend and knows the truth. My heart pounded. I'd never heard the name, but if my grandmother left it, she must have trusted her. The next morning I went to the Atlantic Bank branch downtown. A silver-haired, kind-faced woman behind the counter lit up at my grandmother's name. Oh, Eliza. She was one of the kindest people I've ever known. She invited me into a private room, made tea, and when I showed her the letter, she went quiet, then sighed. Hannah, I'll be honest. 3 weeks before Eliza passed, your mother came here with a notarized authorization form, requesting to transfer the safe deposit box to Luke's name. I was surprised. Your grandmother had told me she'd leave it just for you. But the paperwork was legal, and I couldn't refuse. I asked, "Do you still have a copy of that form?" She nodded, opening a file drawer. I also kept the security camera footage from that day. It shows exactly who signed it. I sat up straight. Could I see it? She pulled up the video, skipping to the right date. The screen showed my mother sitting calmly across from the banker, Luke beside her holding a pen. When handed the form, Luke signed, but the handwriting wasn't mine, and right after, my mother slid another paper over, quickly signing it and passing it back. I knew instantly. It was my forged signature, written by her own hand. Felt numb. For years I'd gotten used to my mother blocking my path, but to watch her forge my name to steal from me. It was both sharp and bitter. Sarah placed her hand on mine, speaking slowly. I can't release this video publicly, but I can write a statement and confirm I witnessed everything. If needed, I'll testify. I nodded, thanking her from the bottom of my heart. You've given me something my mother can't deny. Leaving the bank, I called Mark and met him that afternoon. He watched the video and read the statement, his eyes lighting up. Hannah, this is the missing piece. Forged documents, a witness, and a motive. It all lines up. I sat quietly for a moment. Mark, do you think, if we go public, my mother will try to spin it? I shrugged. She'll try. But this time we have evidence she can't refute. The question is, are you ready for a public fight? Because once it starts, it won't stop. I stayed silent. In my mind, I saw her sitting in the living room, sipping wine, with that small victorious smile she wore whenever she got her way. I knew that if I did nothing, she'd keep taking until nothing was left, and all I'd have would be regret. I took a long breath. I'm ready. Mark locked the file away. Then we start preparing the lawsuit. Hannah, if anyone listening has ever had a family member steal what was rightfully theirs, leave a comment. Her story has a lot more surprises that I think people should hear. I left his office after dark. The harbor lights shimmered on the water. I remembered my mother once saying, "You can't live without this family." She believed it, and for years I almost did too. But now I had a way to break that circle. Back at my small rental, I took out my grandmother's letter again. Her handwriting felt like a warm hand on my shoulder, reminding me I wasn't alone. That night I called Luke. He answered after 3 rings, his voice hesitant. "Sis, what's going on?" Kept my voice calm. "Luke, did you know Mom used my name to take Grandma's house?" Silence for a few seconds, then he sighed. I knew, but I couldn't stop it. She said if I didn't sign, she'd cut off my tuition and I'd have to drop out. I heard the fear in his voice. "Luke, I just saw the video. Mom forged my signature herself. You weren't forced to do anything illegal, but tell me honestly, do you want to keep letting her control you like this?" He was quiet for a long time. Then barely audible. "No, but I'm scared," I said softly. I was scared too for a long time. But fear won't save us. I have a chance to end this, and I want you to stand with me. The conversation ended without any promises, but I knew a seed of doubt had been planted in Luke. The next day, Mark called to say he'd arranged a meeting with a judge he knew to discuss the next steps. He also suggested I try to gather more documents related to my mother's recent transactions. I thought of her event planning company, where every contract and piece of paperwork was meticulously archived. If I could get in there, I might find more than I expected. But how could I get into her private office without being noticed? That's when I thought of Rachel. She worked in event media and knew people at many large planning firms. When I told her my plan, she smiled. "I've got a way. Next week, your mom's company is hosting a charity gala at the Harborview Hotel. I'll get you in as a logistics support staffer. While everyone's busy in the main hall, you'll have a chance to slip into her office." I hesitated. "What if I get caught?" Rachel shrugged. "Say you were looking for the restroom. But trust me, I'll be keeping watch. We can't miss this opportunity." He nodded. "All right, I'll do it." In the days leading up to it, I trained my memory to hold every detail I needed to look for. House sale records, transaction contracts, proof of trust fund withdrawals. I knew that one more sheet of paper could complete the whole picture, and then my mother wouldn't be able to escape it. When the night of the gala arrived, I wore the staff uniform and the fake name badge Rachel had prepared. Golden light shone over glittering evening gowns, and the clink of crystal glasses filled the air. My mother appeared like a queen, smiling and chatting with guests, completely unaware of the staffer weaving through the crowd in the back. I slipped into the rear hallway leading to the offices. The door was locked, but I'd anticipated that. A borrowed master key from the maintenance department was already in my pocket. The lock clicked open softly. Inside, her signature perfume still lingered on the chair. I quickly searched the drawers and found a thick file folder. On top was the contract for the sale of the Sullivan's Island house to a private investor. The next page was a receipt showing 70% of the payment received in cash, and below that was a wire transfer to an account in the Bahamas. Account holder, Luke Collins. Froze. My mind spun. Luke had told me he was pressured into signing things, but why was the money in his account? Had my mother used him as a front to hide the funds? I snapped photos of everything, then put the file back exactly where I'd found it. Leaving the office, I wasn't sure how to feel, relieved to have more evidence, or worried because the story had just become more complicated. Outside, the music and laughter sounded like they belonged to another world. I melted into the crowd, my hand gripping my phone in my pocket, knowing each photo I'd just taken could unlock a storm. I left the charity gala with my heart pounding and cold sweat down my back, even though the early autumn air was crisp. In my pocket, the phone felt heavy as stone with all the pictures of those documents. Every step back to my small apartment carried the tension that anyone on the street might somehow guess what I'd just done. Back home, I sat at the table, opened my phone, and scrolled through each picture. The signature on the house sale contract was clearly my mother's, strong and decisive, but underneath was Luke's, younger, slightly slanted, unmistakably his. On the payment receipt, the large amount wired to the Bahamas stood out. I didn't need to be a financial expert to know this was a way to hide money. But what unsettled me most was that the account name was Luke Collins. I didn't sleep that night. The doubt grew, tangled with a new and painful sense of betrayal. Luke had said he was forced to sign papers, but the money was in his account. Was this my mother's plan, or was Luke hiding something from me? The next morning, I went to Mark's office. He read each photo I'd sent beforehand in silence, sometimes frowning, sometimes tapping his fingers on the desk. When he got to the payment receipt, he looked up at me. "Do you believe Luke isn't involved?" he asked. I hesitated. "I want to. But this," I pushed my phone toward him, "makes it harder." Mark leaned back. "If Luke really is innocent, then most likely your mother used his account as a front. Either way, he's a crucial link. We need him to cooperate." I nodded slightly, but a heaviness settled in my chest. This would put Luke in a difficult, even dangerous position. But without answers, I could never get to the truth. That afternoon, I met Luke at a small, quiet cafe by the Ashley River, the same place we used to sit for hours when Mom was away on business. Luke arrived late, wearing a hoodie and pulling his cap low. He glanced around before sitting down, as if afraid someone was following him. "What's going on?" he asked quietly. I set my phone on the table and pulled up the wired transfer photo. "How do you explain this?" He looked down, then avoided my gaze. "You wouldn't understand." "Then make me understand. Why was the money wired to your account?" I couldn't hide the urgency in my voice. Luke stayed quiet for a long moment. Finally he said, "Mom said the account would be safer in my name. She said it was an advance from the house sale, and when things settled down, she'd transfer it back to her. I wasn't allowed to touch the money." I stared into his eyes. "Do you realize you just admitted to being part of hiding assets? Whether you were forced or not, you're the one holding that money." His hands trembled slightly around his coffee cup. "I know, but you don't understand, Mom. She'll do anything if she feels threatened. I don't want to end up like Dad." That sentence cut through my memory like a cold blade. My father's fall from the balcony was still a shadow that never lifted. I lowered my voice. "Luke, do you think Dad died in an accident?" He didn't answer right away. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "I heard them fighting that day. Loud. Dad said he was filing for divorce and taking both of us with him." Mom lost control. Then there was a crash and silence. I spread through my body. What I'd suspected for years was now being confirmed by my own brother. "Why have you never told anyone?" he asked. "Because I was 10 and Mom threatened me. She said if I told, I'd lose everything and end up living with strangers." I believed her. I took a deep breath to steady myself. "Luke, things are different now. You're grown and you can make your own choices. But if we're going to get free of her, we have to do this together." He looked up, fear and hope mixed in his eyes. "If I help you, she won't let me go. If you don't help, she won't either. But this time we have Mark, we have a witness, and we have proof she forged my signature. We actually have a chance." Luke stayed silent, then gave the smallest nod. I left the cafe feeling both heavy and relieved. Heavy because Luke was still bound by fear. Relieved because at least he'd opened a small door for me to step through. That night, I met with Mark again and told him everything Luke had said. He listened carefully, then said, "This statement is important, but we'll need it recorded or in writing. For now, I think it's time to contact the witness to your father's death." Mark pulled out a slip of paper with the name and number of a gardener who'd worked for our family for years. He'd left Charleston right after my father's death and settled in Florida. He told a friend he saw something that day, but never came forward out of fear, Mark explained. 2 days later, Mark and I flew to Florida. We found him in a small house on the outskirts of Jacksonville. He opened the door with a cautious look, but when I introduced myself as James Collins's daughter, his expression softened. We sat on the porch, the sea breeze carrying the salty air. I asked straight out, "What did you see the day my father died?" He looked off into the distance, silent for a long while. Then, in a gravelly voice, he said, "I saw your mom and dad on the second-floor balcony, arguing hard. James said he was leaving and taking you both. Margaret got angry, stepped closer, and I saw her push him. Happened so fast." I was in shock, and a few days later, I got an envelope of cash and a suggestion to leave Charleston immediately. I clenched my hands on my knees to keep from shaking. Mark asked, "Would you be willing to testify in court?" He sighed. "If it helps his children, I will. But I want my family protected. I need to know we'll be safe." Mark nodded. "We'll arrange that." Leaving Florida, I knew I had another key piece. My father's death was no longer just suspicion. It was now sworn testimony that could change everything. And combined with what I had on the house sale and trust fund, the picture was coming together piece by piece. But I also knew the closer I got to the truth, the greater the danger. My mother had never accepted defeat, and I knew she'd do anything to keep control. I'd have to move carefully. One mistake and it could all fall apart. Back in Charleston, I felt the same mix of heaviness and clarity. The gardener's words had opened a door to the truth, but also placed me in more danger than ever. My mother wouldn't sit still knowing I was tracking her every move. Mark advised, "Hannah, right now the most important thing is to strengthen the financial evidence. We have testimony, but money is what forces answers." He nodded. A plan was already forming. Go back to my mother's office one more time. This time, not just to look at documents, but to get copies of every suspicious contract and transaction. I'd have to take bigger risks, but I had no choice. Rachel was the first person I thought of. She was quick-thinking and could blend into any setting without drawing attention. When I told her, she rested her chin on her hand, smirking. "You want to get into Margaret Collins's office again? Last time you barely got out, and this time it'll be harder." "I know. But I need copies. If it's just pictures, she'll say they're fake. Originals with the notary seal, those she can't deny." Rachel was quiet for a moment, then said, "There's a fundraising gala next week at the Harborview Hotel, and her company's running it. I'll get you a spot on the prep crew. You'll have a temporary access badge." We spent the week preparing. Rachel studied the security layout, entry times, even my mother's habits at events. I practiced my memory and quick movements. Mark made me a detailed list of the documents to grab, along with one reminder. "Don't take too much. Only what's important. The less time inside, the lower the risk." On gala night, I wore the logistics staff uniform, hair neatly tied up, fake badge in place. Music from the ballroom echoed down the hall. From my spot at the auxiliary check-in, I could see my mother in the middle of the crowd, wine glass in hand, smiling with a group of VIP guests. She looked perfect as always. Sparkling gown, smooth hair, flawless smile. But I knew what lay behind it. Rachel crossed the hall, pretending to hand me a stack of papers, and whispered, "Now." I walked quickly toward the office, my heart pounding. The hallway to the work area was quiet, just a few tech staff checking equipment. The office door was locked, but my temporary badge, programmed by Rachel, would open it for exactly 5 minutes. The door clicked, and I slipped inside, closing it behind me. The familiar scent of her perfume made me shiver. I opened her desk drawer and quickly found a black folder. Inside was the contract for my grandmother's house sale to a real estate company, along with the transfer documents. I spotted the red notary seal, exactly what Mark said I needed, and slid the whole folder into my document bag. Digging further, I found a large envelope labeled Blue Shore Project, Confidential. Inside was a list of withdrawals from the trust fund my father had left, each one hundreds of thousands of dollars, sent to various accounts, some overseas. Every single one bore my mother's signature. I was snapping quick photos of a few pages when footsteps echoed in the hallway. I shoved everything into my bag, closed the drawer, and headed for the back door of the office. A security guard walked past, glanced at me but didn't ask anything. I nodded politely and kept walking, forcing my steps to stay calm. Out in the main hallway, I spotted Rachel waiting, holding a tray of wine glasses as a cover. She walked alongside me toward the staff area. Only when the elevator doors closed did I finally exhale. Back home, I called Mark right away. He looked over the photos and files I'd taken and nodded. "Hannah, this is a gold mine. We have proof your mother sold property illegally, withdrew trust funds without authorization, and moved money overseas. With this file, plus the witness statement about your father's death, We could open both a civil and a criminal case at the same time. I stared at the stack of papers on the table, feeling both triumphant and exhausted. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least now I had a weapon. If you're following this story and have ever had to gather piece after piece of evidence to defend the truth, hit like or share so more people understand that sometimes justice starts with small, risky steps like this. Mark told me to hide the files somewhere safe, away from my apartment in case of a search. I brought everything to Rachel's house. We carefully locked it in her safe. Rachel looked at me, her voice unusually serious. "You're playing a very dangerous game, Hannah. But I'm here all the way until it's done." I smiled, but inside was a rising undercurrent. I knew what I'd just done couldn't stay hidden forever. Once my mother realized the files had been copied, she would strike back. And when that happened, the real fight would begin. That night, I lay in bed but couldn't sleep. Images overlapped in my mind. My mother's calm face as she toasted guests, her signature on each fraudulent contract, Luke's fearful eyes, and Mark's words, "This is a gold mine." I knew I'd crossed a line I could never step back over. But this time, I wasn't the scared child hiding in the dark. I was ready to bring everything into the light. I arranged to meet Luke at a small diner at the end of East Bay Street, a place we'd gone often in high school. It wasn't loud. The soft yellow lights and faint smell of toasted bread always made it easier to talk. I chose a corner table with my back to the door to avoid drawing attention. Luke arrived almost 10 minutes late. He walked in looking thinner than the last time I saw him, a dark hoodie pulled over his head, eyes scanning the room like he feared someone might be watching. Even when he sat across from me, he didn't remove the hood. I went straight to the point. "You know what Mom did with Grandma's house, and with Dad's trust fund." Luke lowered his head, silent. I pulled the copy of the house sale contract and the wire transfer receipt from my bag and set them in front of him. "This is your signature. And this is an account in your name in the Bahamas. How do you explain that?" He inhaled deeply, then exhaled slowly. You don't understand. I didn't want to be involved, but Mom. She forced me. She said if I didn't sign, she'd cut off my tuition and even throw me out of the house. I looked him straight in the eye. "And you agreed to let her use your name to hide money. Do you realize that's illegal?" Luke gave a small nod, his shoulders trembling. "I know. But you don't know how ruthless she can be. Since Dad died, she's made me believe she's the only one who can protect me." I was quiet for a moment, then spoke gently. "Luke, do you think she's protecting you? Or just protecting her control?" He looked up, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. I recognized that fear. It was the same fear I'd lived with through my teenage years. "Do you remember the day Dad died?" Yes. He froze, his hand tightening around his glass of water. "I remember." His voice was barely audible. "They were arguing loud. Dad said he was going to divorce her and take both of us. Mom pushed him. I was standing in my doorway, watching from a distance. Then I heard a heavy crash and silence. Luke's admission made my chest tighten. I'd suspected it, but hearing it from him was still a blow. "Why have you never said anything?" Yes. Because I was 10. And a few days later, Mom gave me an envelope of cash, said she would take care of everything, as long as I never spoke about it again. I was scared, and I believed her. I reached across the table and took his hand. "You're not 10 anymore. You can choose a different path. And this time you're not alone." He looked at me like he was weighing something huge. "If I help you, what happens? We bring everything into the open. You'll have to testify, but you'll have a lawyer protecting you. She won't be able to touch us anymore." Luke stayed quiet for a long time, then gave a small but firm nod. We stayed a while longer, discussing details he could give Mark. I reminded him everything needed to be recorded and kept secure, so Mom wouldn't suspect. When we left the diner, Luke looked lighter, though the worry was still there. The next afternoon, I went to Mark's office. He listened as I recounted the conversation, then nodded. Luke's testimony will be an important piece, but we need him to agree to have it recorded or sign a notarized statement. I think he will, but he needs time, I replied. Mark handed me a new set of documents. I found a few other suspicious transactions tied to a project called Blue Shore. Every one of them has your mother's signature. And one more thing. I've reached the witness to your father's death. He's willing to testify if we can guarantee his safety. My heart raced. Step by step, the full picture was becoming clearer. But I also knew the closer we got to the truth, the harder my mother would fight back. 2 days later, Luke called me in the evening. His voice low, almost a whisper. Mom's starting to get suspicious. She asked if I've seen you lately. I said no, but she didn't believe me. A chill ran down my spine. You need to be more careful. Don't give her a reason to check your phone or computer. If you have to, only contact me through the new number I gave you. Luke agreed, then hesitated. I'll sign the statement. But you have to promise to protect me. I promise, I said, knowing it was more than a promise. It was the greatest responsibility I'd ever taken on. A few days later, Luke quietly came to Mark's office. We locked the door, turned off our phones. He read his statement aloud, signed every page, and Mark had a notary on hand to certify it. When it was done, Luke slumped into a chair like he'd set down a massive weight. I feel scared but relieved, he admitted. Mark looked at him, voice steady. You did the right thing. And when the truth comes out, you'll see its value. I walked Luke to the door and hugged him tightly. In that moment, I realized that despite years apart, we were still siblings, and that was enough to keep me fighting. But I also knew it wouldn't end here. Mom had a way of sensing danger, and she wouldn't let it go if she felt her power slipping. My only option was to stay one step ahead, always keep the upper hand, and prepare for the inevitable face-to-face. That night in Portland, a light rain fell, the tiny drops clinging to my living room window like old memories that refused to fade. I sat on the sofa with the file Mark had just sent via private courier. Those pages held everything we'd gathered. Luke's statement, records of suspicious financial transactions, the witness's account of my father's death. I turned each page slowly, my heart beating faster. Everything was laid out with chilling clarity, like the full puzzle was ready, just waiting for me to bring it into the light. But with it came a constant fear, that if Mom found out, everything could fall apart. My phone buzzed. Mark, we're ready for the next step, he said, his tone firm. But I need you to think hard. Once we file this with the prosecutor, there's no going back. I was silent for a few seconds before answering. I've lived my whole life in fear. I don't want to be afraid anymore. Mark paused, as if weighing my words. Then meet me at the office tomorrow morning. We'll sign the authorization for me to officially represent you. The next morning I arrived earlier than planned. The sky was heavy and gray, the air damp from the night's rain. In the small conference room, Mark spread the documents in front of me. I read every sentence, every clause before signing. It felt like locking the door on my past while opening another door, one I didn't yet know what lay behind. Mark handed me a cup of coffee, his voice low. I also need you to be ready. When this news breaks, your mother will hit back hard. Avoid direct confrontations at first. Let us handle the legal side. He nodded. But inside, I knew there would come a time I'd have to face her myself. That evening, while I was organizing paperwork, Luke called. His voice was tense. Mom's starting to liquidate some assets. She's called her personal attorney. I gripped the phone. Do you know which assets? Some properties in Florida and California. I overheard her on a call. I texted Mark immediately. He replied at once. We need to freeze them. I'll file for a temporary injunction with the court. In that moment, I realized this battle had officially entered a new phase, one where every hour mattered. 2 days later, Mark had news. The court approved the temporary freeze. Your mother can't sell or transfer any of the assets on the list. I exhaled, but relief didn't last. A message from an unknown number popped up. You're destroying this family. Stop before it's too late. I didn't need to guess who sent it. But instead of fear, I felt a strange surge of strength. I took a screenshot and sent it to Mark with a note. This is proof she's trying to intimidate me. Mark replied, keep every message, every email, anything related. They all have legal value. The next day, Mark and I had a private meeting with the county prosecutor. He read the file, went through the statements, listened to the recordings, then looked up at me. Do you realize this case will cause a stir? We're talking about millions of dollars, and questions around your father's death. I met his gaze. I know. But if I stay silent, I'll lose more than that money. I'll lose the rest of my life to regret. The prosecutor was quiet for a moment, then nodded. All right. We'll launch a formal investigation. Leaving the building, I stood on the courthouse steps for a long moment, watching the flow of people. In my mind, old memories mixed with a present image. A little girl who once cried in a dark room was now walking through the city center, carrying a case that could change everything. That night, I wrote in my journal, tomorrow will be different. And I'm ready. The next morning, Mark called with news. The prosecutor had signed a summons from my mother to give her initial statement. That meant she would know I was behind it all. I didn't sleep that night. In the dark, I ran through every possibility, every scenario, even the worst ones. But then I remembered the look in Luke's eyes when he signed his statement, and Mark's voice when he said, "We're going to win." Those images steadied me. On the day of her statement, my mother arrived with 2 attorneys. She wore a long black coat and sunglasses that covered half her face, but I could still see her lips pressed tight and her cold, deliberate stride. She didn't look at me, even though I was only a few feet away. The questioning lasted nearly 3 hours. As she walked out, she stopped for just a second, tilted her head toward me, and spoke quietly enough that only I could hear. You'll regret this. I didn't answer. I just looked straight ahead, keeping my gaze as calm as I could. Back home, I immediately recorded a voice memo describing exactly what had happened so I wouldn't miss a single detail. I knew that even the smallest piece could become an important lever in this case. As night fell, I opened my laptop and quietly saved every document to an external hard drive, then locked it in a safe. Caution was something I'd learned well from years in this family. Before turning off the lights, I thought about the road ahead. More challenges, more hearings, more confrontations. But this time I wasn't alone. I had Mark, I had Luke, and I had the truth on my side. And somewhere deep down, I believed the audience out there, people who had known what it felt like to be betrayed by their own family, would understand and connect with this story. If you've ever seen yourself in the words I've shared, leave a comment, hit like and share so more people know they're not alone. That morning, Portland was cloaked in heavy fog. I sat in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a hot cup of coffee, but my mind spun through 100 thoughts. The investigation was widening, not just looking into unusual transactions but digging into the relationships and history of my family. Mark texted, asking me to meet him at his office at 10 a.m., saying he had new information. When I walked into the conference room, I saw that it wasn't just Mark. There were 2 strangers with him. One was an investigator from the prosecutor's office, the other a forensic financial expert. On the table were stacks of data charts, graphs, and old bank statements. Mark began. We've traced several offshore accounts held under shell companies. Interestingly, All of them have indirect ties to your mother. I listened closely, each word pouring into my ears like a truth I both feared and wanted to hear. The forensic financial expert added, "We've found signs that your father's assets were moved overseas before his death, possibly as part of a long-term plan." I clenched my hands under the table. Part of me wanted to stand up and shout that it was insane, but another part knew this was exactly the kind of thing my mother could do. Mark slid a file toward me. "This is a summary of what we'll present in court. I need you to read it carefully, and if there's anything else you know, add it." I flipped through page after page, seeing company names I'd never heard of, amounts with endless zeros, and signatures. Familiar ones. My father's signature appeared on transfer documents, but the handwriting looked slightly shaky and lacked his usual steadiness. I remembered how his health had been failing at that time. "This?" I looked up, my voice trembling. "When did he sign these?" The investigator replied, "About 2 months before he passed." A chill ran down my spine. If that was true, it was highly possible he had been pressured or tricked into signing papers he didn't fully understand. That afternoon I met Luke at a small riverside cafe. He arrived a few minutes late, his breath still visible in the cold air. When I told him what I'd learned, he bit his lip, anger flickering in his eyes. "You know, I once saw her carry a stack of papers into Dad's room. When I asked, she said it was just some insurance forms." I believed her. I put a hand on his shoulder. "It's not your fault. None of us thought she would go that far." Luke lowered his head, his voice soft. "But now I believe it all." 2 days later, Mark called with another development. At his office, he showed me a copy of an internal email between my mother and a high-end real estate broker. It clearly discussed selling a piece of land in California that was in my father's name, just weeks before he died. What stood out was that the selling price was nearly half its market value, and the difference had vanished without a trace. When I finished reading, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The things I had suspected were now taking shape. My mother wasn't just trying to keep all the assets, she was willing to sacrifice their true value if it meant she could get the money quickly. Mark said, "This will be one of the key points when we face the jury. It shows financial motive and deliberate action." I nodded, feeling both bitter and determined. That night, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the stack of files on the table. Outside, rain tapped softly on the porch roof. Each sound felt like a reminder that the road ahead would be long and stormy. I thought of my father, of the nights he'd sit reading with a cup of tea to his left, smiling gently when I talked about my plans. I wondered, if he were still alive, would he stand beside me or try to keep the peace as he always had? But then I answered myself. He wouldn't leave me to fight alone. The next day, Mark and I attended a closed meeting with the prosecutor and the investigation team. They announced they would be seeking a warrant to search my mother's home for original documents, contracts, correspondence, and electronic devices. Hearing that made my heart pound. I knew this could be a turning point. If they found direct evidence, the entire case could shift. "You need to be prepared," the prosecutor said, "because there's a strong chance she'll blame you, maybe even attack your reputation in the media." I took a deep breath. I've been ready for that for a long time. On Monday morning, the warrant was executed. I wasn't there, but Mark and the team reported they'd seized important materials, including my mother's personal notebook, which detailed wire transfers and secret meetings. When I heard, I felt a mix of surprise and a strange sadness. After all, she was still my mother, and reading her own handwriting calculating every dollar felt like peeling back a part of her I'd never wanted to see. That night I couldn't sleep. I paced around the house, looking out the window at the dim yellow glow of the streetlights stretching across the quiet street. In my head, I heard her words from when I was a child. "Family is everything." Yet now, that same family was where I had to fight to protect myself. I knew that from this moment on there was no going back. And I also knew I'd have to be stronger than ever to see the truth through to the end. The next morning, Portland finally had a touch of sunlight after days of gray. I sat in Mark's office, in front of the pile of files the team had compiled from what they'd seized at my mother's house. Light slanted through the window, laying thin gold streaks across the pages. I turned them slowly, feeling both anticipation and a weight pressing against my chest. Mark poured me a cup of coffee and spoke deliberately. "We found a chain of emails between your mother and her personal attorney, discussing in detail how to hide assets, and a plan to cut you out of the inheritance entirely." I gripped the edge of the file. The words were so clear, so blunt, they were almost brazen. No more guesses or inferences. This was undeniable evidence. It felt like part of my memory had been ripped open. Family dinners, her loving words, now just a thin shell over a harsh truth. "What do we do next?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Mark looked at me with a serious but confident gaze. "We'll take all of this to court. But before we do, you need to be ready for the deposition. They'll try to discredit you." I nodded, feeling as if I'd just signed an invisible commitment to go all the way. That afternoon I met Luke at the park near my house. He brought 2 iced teas, setting one beside me on the bench. When I told him what I'd found, he sat in silence for a long moment, then said quietly, "I knew you'd find the truth, but hearing it's still hard to believe." I gave a faint, sad smile. "Hard to believe, but true. And we have to accept it if we want to protect Dad's legacy." Luke looked at me, his eyes filled with resolve. "Then tell me what you need me to do." I touched his shoulder lightly. "Stand firm in court. Tell exactly what you saw and remember. That's all." 2 days later, Mark and I went to the courthouse for the preliminary hearing. The atmosphere in the closed courtroom was tight as a wire. My mother sat across the aisle, her silver hair neatly pinned, her face expressionless. When her eyes passed over me, I caught a flicker of the same coldness I'd felt during past confrontations. Her attorney opened with smooth words, painting her as a devoted mother and me as someone with personal motives. My chest burned, but I stayed silent. When it was Mark's turn, he laid out every piece of evidence: emails, notebook entries, contracts. Each time a document appeared on the screen, I saw her expression shift. Annoyance, then unease before she masked it again. During cross-examination, their attorney tried to dig into my personal life. My job, old debts, even relationships. I knew it was just a tactic to throw me off. But I remembered Mark's advice. Stick to the point. Don't let them control the story. I answered each question briefly, my eyes fixed on the judge. When the hearing ended, I exhaled, feeling like I'd just run a long race. That night at home, my phone buzzed with messages from friends and colleagues. They offered support, encouragement. One close friend wrote, "Everyone can see you're standing on the side of what's right. Don't be afraid." I read each one, warmth spreading through me. This path was full of challenges, but I knew I wasn't alone. And if anyone hearing this story has ever been betrayed by their own family, they'll understand that the greatest strength comes from knowing you're not the only one. If you believe justice is worth fighting for, like, share, or leave a comment so this story can reach more people. A few days later, the prosecutor invited me to a private session to prepare for the official trial. We sat around a long table, going over every detail: how to answer questions, which documents to emphasize, and the unexpected situations that might come up. "They might call witnesses against you," the prosecutor said, "including people you wouldn't expect." Pause. "Who do you mean?" "Could be distant relatives or family friends. People convinced that you're asking for too much." I pressed my lips together. His words didn't scare me, but they reminded me that beyond the legal fight, I'd also be facing a battle over my reputation. That weekend, I decided to walk along the river to clear my head. The cool breeze played with my hair, and the sound of the water lapping against the shore felt like a somber soundtrack. I thought of my childhood, when my mother would hold my hand and tell me stories about our family and love. Those memories were still there, but they felt different now. Not a refuge anymore, but a reminder that everything can change in an instant. When I got home, I opened my laptop and read through the entire case file again. Every detail was like a puzzle piece, slowly forming the bigger picture. I knew I had to master every piece of information, because in court, one small slip could be all the other side needed. One evening, Luke called me. His voice was soft but worried. "Hey, I ran into one of Mom's friends today. She said Mom has a way to turn things around, and that she has evidence against you." I was silent for a few seconds before asking, "Real evidence or something they're making up?" "I don't know, but I think you should be ready." I gave a small smile, though my chest felt heavy. "I'm always ready, Luke." The days that followed, Mark and I worked non-stop, drafting my opening statement, rehearsing answers to tough questions, and building our rebuttal strategy. The closer we got to the trial date, the more my heartbeat matched the rhythm of our preparations. I knew this wasn't just a trial about dividing assets. This was where the truth would come out, my chance to show I wouldn't stay silent in the face of injustice, even if the one behind it was my own mother. And if my story gave someone else the courage to speak up, then I'd already achieved part of my goal. Don't forget to subscribe so you can follow what happens next, because this journey isn't over yet. On the morning of the trial, Portland's sky was thick with gray clouds, as if warning of a coming storm. I arrived almost an hour early, standing at the courthouse steps and taking a deep breath to steady myself. The scent of old wood and cold stone blended together, reminding me of every place I'd ever walked into where words and evidence could change someone's entire life. Mark arrived a few minutes later, carrying the thick file we'd been building for weeks. He gave me a firm nod, his expression serious but with a hint of encouragement. We stepped inside, our footsteps echoing across the stone floor. In the courtroom, my mother was already seated on the other side, her posture upright, her face unreadable. When our eyes met, there was something in hers, not quite hatred but absolute guardedness. She didn't greet me, nor did she look away. The prosecutor began, presenting document after document, email after email, all bearing my mother's handwriting. On the large screen, letters appeared detailing how assets were hidden, how I was to be cut out of the inheritance, even notes about paying certain witnesses to stay quiet. Soft murmurs rose from the gallery as each piece of evidence appeared. I didn't turn around, but I could feel eyes shifting toward my mother. Her lawyer stood to respond, speaking of misunderstandings and protecting the family. His voice was calm, tinged with emotion, painting her as a mother acting out of love. But the more I listened, the more it felt like a thin coat of paint over a wall full of cracks. When it was my turn, Mark signaled me to the witness stand. I walked slowly, aware of every gaze on me. Sitting down, I looked directly at the judge, my hands clasped tightly together. The opposing lawyer began his questioning with a pointed tone. "Are you sure you understand what your mother did? Couldn't she have been trying to protect the family's assets from untrustworthy people?" I took a deep breath. I trust what I see, not what I'm told to believe. Those documents aren't about protection. They're about concealment and exclusion. But you and your mother had personal conflicts. Isn't it possible you're interpreting everything in the worst light? I held his gaze. Personal conflicts don't forge signatures on legal documents. And they don't create numbers in a bank account. The courtroom fell silent. He hesitated before shifting his questions, but I answered each one directly. I wasn't here to trade emotional blows. I was here to lay the truth bare. When I stepped down, Luke took the stand. He looked tense but steady as he recounted family meetings, overheard conversations, and private discussions between Mom and her lawyer. His voice wavered a few times, but every word matched the evidence. I watched him, feeling both protective and grateful. We'd grown up together, endured the same cold silences, and now stood here side by side to speak the truth. The final arguments were more intense than I expected. My mother's side brought in supporting witnesses, but most offered second-hand stories without solid proof. Mark countered each point, always bringing it back to the original documents. The judge listened, jotting down notes, his expression unreadable. When the gavel struck, signaling a recess before the verdict, I felt like I'd just stepped out of a tightening grip. Not free yet, but breathing again. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the promise of rain. I stood on the courthouse steps, looking at the gray sky, thinking of everything that had just unfolded. Whatever the outcome, I knew I'd done what was necessary. I had spoken the truth and refused to let fear or family ties stop me from protecting what was right. Mark joined me, saying nothing at first, then quietly asked, "You holding up?" He nodded. "I am. No matter what happens, I'm ready." He gave a small smile, not joyful, but enough to give me a little more strength. Driving home, I passed familiar streets lined with trees and old buildings. Every corner carried a memory. Some warm, some painful. I knew life after this trial would never be the same. But maybe that was the point. Maybe it would open a different path. A path where I could live without the weight of family secrets. A path where the truth, no matter how bitter, could be the ground I walk on. You know, every family has stories outsiders can't fully understand. Some choose silence to keep the peace. Others step into the light, face the truth, and speak, no matter the cost. I chose the second path, not for revenge, but to reclaim peace and fairness for myself. I believe everyone who hears this story will take something from it. Some may agree, some may not, and some may see parts of their own story in mine. What about you? If you were in my place, would you stay silent or stand up? If this story made you think, stirred a feeling, or brought back a memory, please like and share so others can hear it too. And don't forget to follow the channel and turn on notifications to catch the next real-life family story, where there's just as much laughter as there are tears, and lessons we can all take to heart. See you in the next story.